A very, very warm welcome to Speak Up for Our Planet. And I'm very, very pleased to see so many people here.
Yes.
I would like to introduce you to Jackie. Wave your arms in the air, please, Jackie. There she is with penguins behind her. She is our host for this evening. And Rosie, wave your arms in the air, Rosie, who is my colleague in Speak Up for Our Planet, who helps me to run it. This is a very special meeting because it's a connection between Rotary and Toastmasters. This is why I've got Rotary and Toastmasters above my head. Toastmasters is an organization made up of clubs all over the world whose purpose is to grow public speakers and leaders. Rotary is an organization made up of clubs all over the world whose purpose is to do good under 7 headings, including supporting the environment. Speak Up for Our Planet was founded 3.5 years ago on the strength of a decision way, way, way up high in the organizations of these 2 massive groups, that if the pair of them actually got together and did some things together, the potential would be enormous. So as far as Toastmasters is concerned, this evening, Jackie is a very distinguished Toastmaster. She belongs to several clubs and she's had positions in all sorts of high levels. And Rosie and I both belong to Toastmasters too. As far as Rotary is concerned, at Speak Up for Our Planet, we actually very frequently have Rotarians who come to listen to our talks. But this evening, we have extended a special invitation to my club, which is a global e-club with members from India, Africa, Europe, the United States, and probably some other places I haven't thought of. So a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Please put your questions in the chat. Please stay muted unless we ask you to speak. And that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to your host, Jackie.
Welcome. I know 1 or 2 people and I recognize 1 or 2 faces. Hello, Alan. Hello, Tim. And what I would like to do is that my role this evening is as host. And what we're going to do is to listen to 2 experts. And then we are going to throw the floor open to questions. In order to keep to time, I'm going to ask that everyone stays muted. Please do not raise your hand, as Margaret has, unless you have a technical problem, in which case Rosie will talk to you privately through the private chat. But if you have questions as you go, please raise them, please write them into chat. And what we will do is we will tackle all of the questions at the end after both speakers have spoken. We find if we don't do it that way, then people just get hung up in questionings and the second speaker never gets a chance to speak. We're going to start, as I say, we've got 2 speakers this evening. We're going to start with Steve Forster, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And a little bit about Steve. He was elected county councillor and he is an EV infrastructure specialist with Osprey. Steve has been driving EVs as his preferred transport for over 10 years, following many years as a petrol head. I understand that. His role in the EV space includes working with Osprey Charging Network, as well as advising government and public sector on EV trends and infrastructure. He also helps with myth busting to correct the fake results or fake news about EVs, helping people choose what's right for them. Steve, welcome, and over to you.
Jackie, thank you very much for that lovely intro. That's kind of you. And good evening, everyone. Greetings. Just give you a sort of 3-minute helicopter pitch that maybe builds on what Jackie was saying. Yes, I am a councillor. I'm an elected councillor in Hampshire, down in the south of England. I also, as part of my responsibility, I'm one of the cabinet members that has responsibility for all the schools across Hampshire. So I run around 550 schools with a fairly extensive team that includes all the teachers, of course. I've been an elected councillor for about 12 years. My background was building companies in the IT space. And I guess I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. I've floated them on the stock market. Done that 3 times now and made a couple of pounds in the process. Quite right, I am a petrol head. Guilty, sorry. I've raced cars and motorbikes fairly successfully. I ran a race team in British GT and even did the Le Mans 24-hour, etc., where I ran the team for 3 years. So I love cars. I do like speed. But I came to my senses about 12, 13 years ago when I bought my first EV. And since then, I've actually owned around 25 EVs, because I do change my car and run more than one at the same time. So I'm fairly experienced. And I've done probably since then, about 400,000 miles on electric power in those various vehicles. At Osprey, which is one of the 3 largest open source charging networks for rapid chargers in the UK, I'm responsible for our site acquisition, working with councils across the country, and by the country I mean England, Scotland and Wales, to come up with new sites where we can invest between £100,000 and 3 or 4 million on a site to develop it for the ultra rapid charging, where you can charge a vehicle pretty much from empty to full in anything between 12 minutes with some of the new cars to about an hour, hour and a quarter on some of the other cars. So I hope that gives you a sort of vague feel for what I do. And as Jackie said, I do advise an awful lot of people from councils through government, English and Scottish and Welsh on their EV strategy. They don't always listen to that advice, which is very frustrating. We do at Osprey work very closely with Nick at Chargy, because the 2 bits of the charging infrastructure market that we work on are totally complementary, and we're often educating local authorities. And I'd like to just say one thing on that. A lot of people base their future strategy on history. And in some sections that works, but it's a bit like asking someone to talk about digital media when all they're looking at is VHS tapes or Betamax. It's a bit like asking someone to look at rolling out mobile phones when they were BT and responsible for landlines. You have to do a big shift to look at where the market is going, not where it's been, to understand this market. And I think the last 12, 18 months has seen more change in the EV marketplace than anyone was actually expecting, except maybe a few of us that are in the business. So I hope that sets the scene. I'm looking forward to some challenging questions and helping anyone.
Thank you, Steve. I've got a few questions which I've made a note of for afterwards. So our next speaker this evening is Nick Hoolin. Did I say that right, Nick?
Close.
Close. Okay, I'm sure you'll correct me. Nick is a dedicated advocate for clean air and climate sustainability. With almost 2 decades of experience in societal change principles, he's been at the pioneering forefront of the deployment of public electric vehicle charging infrastructure at Chargy, one of the UK's major public EV charge point networks. Nick supports local authorities in their transition to electric vehicles using cost-effective, scalable public EV charging networks installed along residential streets. By prioritising accessibility, reliability and affordability, Nick is helping people living without driveways to realistically access public EV charging. Over to you, Nick. I'm looking forward to this.
And hopefully I can put a bit of a human stance on that. It was a rather corporately framed introduction there, and taking lead from Steve's on that. I think we'll pacify it to talk with each other as people. Yes, I mean, on the personal level, I've been active in the climate space for over a decade now, understanding what the problem is, and I'm supported and surrounded where I live with professors and climate scientists, which I've been able to access to qualify where we are and where we're heading and what the problem is and solutions and what is required as a society for these systematic changes that are required, and also individual choices. Interesting about Le Mans. Yes, I was been in the crowds at Le Mans for more than a decade, waving and cheering them on at wee hours in the morning at various points around the circuit. So know it very well. And enjoyed the sounds and smells of that environment at the time. But data and what is going on around us took more of a hold within myself, and I've put myself forward into this industry since 2019. And prior to that, I was involved in other societal principle changes with technology in the early days, and where smartphones were just about in our hands, just launched, and I was part of a company called Groupon. You might or might not have heard about it, but there was 7 of us that invented it in a wee paid by the hour office in London. But then over a 2-year period, it then floated on NASDAQ for billions of pounds. So I've seen what the principles of change can benefit people with convenience and low costs. And we're in the same principles now with our change of road transport and the electrification. It needs these principles to be given to the people of choice, of convenience and lower cost to make this change as individuals and our full term of society for our needs for climate, sustainability and clean air. Now, a lot of people say, well, what is Chargy, and what do you mean about on-street residential charging? It doesn't really sound sexy, but it sounds interesting to a lot of people. I've got a presentation which, if you don't mind, we will just breeze through in a couple of minutes. It just gives you images to what Chargy does, and you can take it as a person and understand what the actual network is doing for the people to be able to give them that low cost convenience choice to be able to go to electric vehicles. Now, if you bear with me. I'll ask just to confirm if you can see that. Excellent. Thank you. From South Africa. Thank you very much. So yeah, these are the images of electric vehicles that are street parked at home, plugged into the Chargy network. And the Chargy network is delivered at scale along entire lengths of residential streets. And those streets, as you can see by design, are of terraced homes. And also you'll see within these selection of images that you'll see that not only is it terraced homes, but it's also close to multi-dwelling units there, like apartments, public housing estates, and so forth. And you might also note that it appeals to all segments of society of people, that are people that use their cars for their own private use, but also intense usage, by commercial drivers, those like taxi drivers or so forth. You know, they live in that public housing estate a number of floors up in the sky. And it gives them the convenience and low cost to be able to charge their vehicle at times when they're resting, mainly overnight while they're sleeping as well. You've got commercial drivers like last mile delivery drivers, again, living in the homes that surround that van. And another image there is of a taxi driver. And you can see there that all homes have got, none of them have got driveways there. It's intense, really. So again, whilst I was walking past near where I live, there was a happy taxi driver just woken up on the Sunday morning before he goes to work. He absolutely adores this. He told me that he has the opportunity to drive electric because the service that he rents the taxi from provides electric vehicles at the same rental costs per week as previously his Prius, but by driving electric, it's half the cost. So he's doubled his income by just switching to electric, and he's having that ability to gather that electricity right outside where he lives. We have over 3,000 charge points in the UK. And as I say, they're mainly placed on the street, and they're very harmonious in its appeal to the streetscape, installed by using lamppost infrastructure, if it's at curbside, or we have very thin, slimline bollards that we can use as well. And with that 3,000 figure, it's growing week by week by week. And we have a mission to be society's preferred network in the UK by 2030, and our vision is to be helping over 1 million drivers convert to electric vehicle in that time frame. In the middle there, you could just see that it's graphically appealing on the mobile phone to start, stop, and pay for charging, and it's a two-touch moment to do this service, which makes us one of the easiest networks to use, and that is one of the qualities that people are requiring. They're saying, you can provide me the convenience, you can provide me the low cost, but it's got to be extremely easy to use. And it's got to be as easy as buying an apple at the local supermarket, not to set up data intense accounts or anything like that. Just literally press the button, charge, it automatically charges your payment account, and the electricity flows into your car. And in reverse, you just press one button and it stops charging. We're a UK-based company, so we should all cheer. The green economy is appealing to us here in the UK. We can do this. We build the charge points here in the UK in Coventry, and I know one of our attendees today is in Coventry. Our factory is in Coventry up there, and we're very innovative in the ways that we develop our technology. So what I've shown you here in this image, we're not stopping. We're each individual street sometimes needs different types of shapes of charge points, and we'll develop those in-house. And our network is placed in all types of settings I've been talking about on the street, but it also can go into car parks as well. And it can also be fitted to walls and using bollards, and as I say, using lampposts. And you never know, in the future, there may be even cableless charging, but we'll see how that pans out. Well, thank you for that. Do you want to help me stop sharing there? Thank you.
Did you want to continue, Nick, or?
No, I'm raring
You're done.
forward to the questions, and I know there's been a few within the chat box section as we.
There has indeed. I'm going to ask the questions not in the order that they've been presented, but the order I think they're of most interest. And I'm going to start with a question from Graham, who asks, because it's particularly relevant to what you've just been talking about, Nick, can the local substations and street cabling cope with a load when everyone in the street has their own charger at home? And will the fuses and even the cabling need upgrading? Actually, I'd like to ask that of Steve after Nick's given us reply.
Fine. So when you're at home, you've got a great thing that you can that you have on your side, which is time. And when you have a lot of time, you don't need a lot of power, because mainly 90% of people that do own electric vehicles gather their energy or charge their vehicles overnight while they sleep. So in that context, the public network of Chargee fits within the network capacity that's available in the public realm. So no major grid upgrades are needed, no major big fuses are needed to be changed or anything like this. Because interestingly, there is a nuance in the UK when compared with Europe, who doesn't have this advantage, that our lamppost infrastructure in the main, in our residential streets, has been assigned, believe it or not, 6 kilowatts of energy per lamppost, 6,000 watts. So we actually configured the network to deliver 5 kilowatts from that lamppost, and that lamppost has actually now got an LED at the top. So it's got a whole load of energy that's available. So yeah, no upgrades needed and very easily fitted to the public network that's out there.
Are we all going to have enough energy for everyone to have access to EV charging, do you think, from what you're just saying?
Well, if all things align, policy, politically, we have got in the UK the ability to self-finance the growth of renewable energy, build more wind farms, build more solar farms here, incur and increase more employment in this country. It is all within our hands today. We can do this. And it's forecast by 2030 that we'll actually be a net provider of energy to our neighbours, of around about 10 or 20% beyond our energy demand, even with the forecast transition of the electrification of transport.
Fabulous, thank you. Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, a few points, if I may. Thank you, and totally agree with what Nick was saying. I think the first thing I'd say is there's lots of energy. In this country, we're using 30–40% less energy than we were 10 or 15 years ago because of the move to more energy efficiency, whether that's in homes, whether that's in industry, whether it's the reduction in manufacturing industry that we're seeing, like steel, etc. So we've got a lot of spare power around, but not all of it is green. We still use a fair amount of gas, although we're not using coal anymore, which is really good to see. But there's more coming on stream. The second thing I'd add to that is a question I often get asked is, well, is there enough power and aren't EVs going to cause a problem? Actually, in many instances, EVs in the future are going to be the solution, not the problem. Because we have a lot of sustainable power, wind power, solar, that's produced when it's windy, when it's sunny, but we can't always store it. So you need batteries to store it or other means of storing it. And of course, EVs are big mobile batteries. And when they're plugged in, particularly if they're plugged in overnight, they can charge when there's spare power, but they can actually feed back through those charge points into the grid. So the classic 7:30 peak at the end of Coronation Street, when people put their kettles on, instead of having to fire up a gas power station, just draw a bit of power out of your vehicles. So there's lots of technology that's coming through that will enable better use of power, and EVs are part of the solution. One of the issues, though, that we have today is a lot of the power is in the wrong place. If we wanted to put a lot of charge points or some ultra rapid charge points in location, we need access to probably the high voltage grid, the stuff you see overground or that's buried deep underground. It's got to be conveniently located, and sometimes it isn't. And that's why you see so many roadworks popping up as people are doing grid connections. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of investment needed, but there's certainly not a shortage of power. And there is a desire from government, from drivers, from homeowners to get the power in the right places. And that means we'll be seeing more substations, and better distribution.
That's good. Thank you, Steve. I've got another question for you, Steve. It's a slightly different topic, and that is that Alan would like to know that you mentioned that there's been huge changes in EVs in the last 18 months. I was wondering if you could give us some examples.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of evolution on EVs. The first thing I'd say over the last couple of years is we've just seen a plethora of new introductions of vehicles. If you go back 2, 3, 4 years, there weren't that many brands involved and there weren't that many cars, and the average range was about 100, 130 miles. Today, the average range of an EV is creeping north of 250, heading towards 300 miles. The battery sizes are bigger. Just about every manufacturer has got an EV in their range, and they're starting to sell really well. So the overall choice is better. The driving has always been exemplary. They're lovely to drive, but we're just seeing more choice, more reliability, and more range. And that's meaning that they're more attractive, coupled with the prices coming down. 18 months ago, you would have been hard pressed to find an EV that was less than £35,000 new. And to get one secondhand, probably looking at 20, 22,000. Today, there are, because they're 2 years further on, we've got more cars coming onto the secondhand market. So you can buy a good number of EVs secondhand for in the tens of thousands, 10,000, even under. There's some sort of 4,000 or 5,000. And for new cars, you're seeing quite a good number at around the 17,000, 20,000 pound mark. And the average price has come down probably by about 5 or 10. So all of that is driving the market, but I think we're only scratching the surface. I would expect within another 2 years, if not much sooner, we'll see parity of price between a new EV and a new petrol or diesel car. And actually, it won't be long before the EVs are cheaper.
What's the life of a second-hand EV like?
Huge.
Because I think a lot of people are concerned about having the cost of having to replace batteries.
Yeah, the batteries are not the batteries that you find in a mobile phone that maybe have a 12 or 18-month life. The batteries in cars are designed to last 20 years. Most of them have a warranty of between 7 and 10 years. So they're actually guaranteeing their capacity for that long. I'd love to see a car that has a 20-year life on its original engine and clutch and gearbox. Typically, it's much shorter. Put it in miles, because that's really important. If you look at a standard petrol or diesel, at 100, 150,000 miles, they're ready to go kaput. With an EV, they'll typically last 200, 250,000 miles. So I don't think you should be worried about the cost of a battery because it's so far out. But also, one really important thing I'd add to that, what's the cost of a new engine, clutch, gearbox in a car versus the cost of a new battery or electric motor? It's pretty similar.
Okay, thank you.
The EV will last longer.
Nick, anything to add to that?
Yes, it was quite interesting that you should have a look at examples where Steve has said, yes, let's look at this in miles. Talk to the taxi community and then peer in and have a look at their odometer. There's known cases of taxi drivers who are still driving 2014 version electric vehicles back then, of which is now is 10 years old, and they're seeing 500,000 miles. There's some with 800,000 miles, still with the original motor, still with the original battery. Yeah, and there's numerous cases like this.
That's good to know. I know that was one of my questions, but I know Tim was asking that same question about battery life. I've got a question from Marcella that she's read that EVs are not allowed on ferries because of potential fire hazard. Is that true? Are there these sorts of disadvantages to EVs?
if I may answer that, there are so
Please.
many myths and bits of misinformation around. I was speaking to someone the other day who said the Luton Airport fire was caused by an EV. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was a Range Rover, not an EV. That's the sort of misinformation that hits the headlines. You are, depending on who you believe, if you believe the Swedes, you're 20 times less likely to have an EV fire than a petrol or diesel. But if you look at British or Australian stats, they're actually saying on the most recent stats, it's 80 times less likely. There again, petrol is actually explosive. So maybe we should all be really worried about petrol cars.
That's a good question. Nick, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and interestingly, in comparative stats, there is what was considered transition technology up until only but recently, but now is being seen as a technology which should be sidestepped completely, which is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, which has both technologies on board. And statistics are now stating that those are becoming much more of a fire hazard than anything, whereas you've got high voltage cables and explosive hydrocarbons stored together in very close quarters. So if people are looking at it from an explosive point of view, yes, please make your stride straight from combustion towards electric and not using any stepping stone technology in between. So.
Yeah, it's certainly something I'm debating at the moment. I've got a question from Caroline, who says, given that there's no such thing as a free lunch, I like that. What downsides are there to the spread of EVs around? And this is from someone, including myself, Caroline, who was persuaded to buy a diesel car because they were better for the environment. How sure can we be that EVs are going to continue to be an upside? And are there any downsides right now? Nick, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So we have to have a look at the greater needs here. So and balance and consider the balance. So our greater needs environmentally on a global level and also locally to our respiratory systems requires us to transition our road transport technology away from combustion. Not different types of combustion liquids from petrol or diesel, but completely to a zero tailpipe emission vehicles. And this is why going to electric vehicles is hugely advantageous for us as society, with very little considerations for any negative points of view.
What about animals in cars? Are there any dangers to them from EVs?
Animals in cars? I don't know if you want to give us an example.
I was thinking particularly where people are having to charge their cars away from home and have animals in their cars. What would you suggest they do with them?
Animals in your car. How would you manage your animal in your car for a time period?
Yeah, I think it's the length of time that it takes to charge at the moment for many people, or the queuing in order to get to charge your vehicle.
Well,
yeah, let me touch on that if I might, because it depends where you're charging. For most people, the best place to charge is where you're parked. And most cars are parked for 90% of the time. Outside your house at night, at the shops, at work. So that's the time to charge. And that's exactly the market that Chargee are in. If you can charge at home, you should charge at home, because that's always going to be the most cost-effective way of doing it, especially if you've got off-street parking, if you've got to drive. Not everyone has. And that's where Chargee's offering is relevant, because they're fitting chargers that go on street in the street lights or in bollards. People are parking their cars there for a considerable amount of time, and they can charge them while they're not doing something. Well, you're not going to leave your car in there while you're parked your dog or cat in the car whilst you're parked outside your house. you'll do what you normally do: go for a walk, take it in the garden.
I'm thinking more of people who
Yeah.
are doing long distances
Yeah,
because
and I was just about to come
Yeah,
on to that. And I
okay.
think if you're doing a long distance charging, or if you're doing a long distance, you'll probably need to stop to charge after about somewhere between 3 and 6 hours of driving to charge your EV. I would suggest that most people need to stop to walk their dog or visit the toilet or grab a drink, a coffee, typically every, I was going to say 3 to 6, it's probably every 2 to 4 hours for most people. They're not going to drive for more than 3 or 4 hours in a stint. So the same applies. And you're not going to stop for 2 minutes. The average petrol station stop is around 12 minutes, including buying a Mars bar for £2. The same applies. You'll stop your car at a good EV charging location, a rapid hub or something like that. And there are literally hundreds, thousands, in fact, now across the country. And yes, your stop might be 20 minutes to 35, 40 minutes. So it might be a little bit longer, but for most people, especially if they're going to grab a bite to eat after 3 or 4 hours, that's about right.
I think that's true if you're talking about 3 or 4 hours driving, but I'm having 1 or 2 comments on here of people who've not been able to do much over 200 miles, which is you might need to charge if you say you were driving to Edinburgh.
Yeah, and if you're driving to Edinburgh and you're traveling in one of the earlier generation cars, you'll probably want to charge every 200, 220 miles. And that is 3 to 4 hours, unless you're traveling at very illegal speeds. It is different to driving a petrol or diesel, where you may only fill up after 7 or 8 hours. But not many people are going to drive for 7 or 8 hours without stopping to stretch their legs.
No,
and on a
that's true.
drive like that, with some of the new cars, a 15-minute stop will give you another 200 miles.
A question that's always intrigued me, as someone who sometimes forgets to fill up their car with petrol soon enough, is what happens if your car runs out of charge, your EV runs out of charge, and you're nowhere near somewhere you can charge up. Are there solutions to that now?
Yeah, there are. It's a lot easier than if you run out of petrol or diesel, because if you run out of petrol or diesel, you've got to find a petrol station.
Yep.
If your car runs out of charge, you can plug it into a 3-pin socket. It won't charge very quickly, but you can pretty much find a 3-pin socket somewhere.
What about the AA and the RAC? Can they help you in that situation?
Yeah, they can. There are services that will offer you mobile recharging. So I think it's a lot easier. The stories you saw about someone running out of charge, about unreliable charge points, they were true 5, 6, 7 years ago when the market was in its infancy. Going back to the point we made about cars having changed a lot in 18 months, the charging networks have changed massively. So you heard Nick say he's got over 3,000 charge points now, and that is going to probably double or treble over the next year or so. Our business has got over 1,000 and will double that this year. They are now becoming really commonplace. So they're all over the place.
Are you getting enough government support to help you do this, do you think?
So from Chargy's perspective, within the setting of on-street residential, there's this central government fund that's been organised and distributed to local authorities, which is called the Local Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund, and its sovereignty is large. In total, it's just over £400 million of citizens' money. And what the design of this is to inspire the private sector to come in, which Chargy represents, of equal amount in our sovereignty and in private equity as well. And it's to build the network at scale, at pace, to encourage this adoption in the face of our climate crisis, so we can actually transition towards EVs at the necessary speeds that is required. And where people are saying, well, that's a lot of citizens' money, but once you grow this network, and we might not get into it too technically in this conversation, and you grow electric vehicles, these batteries and this whole system that it's going to plug into this renewable energy ecosystem is going to give us as a nation not only cleaner energy, but also a lower cost living as well. So that's also going to be addressing our cost of living crisis, which we're experiencing at this time.
Is it enough, do you think?
Is it enough? Yeah, the private industry has come in its mighty force with its equity and intelligence. So, and also if you work with most cost-effective methods, much like Chargy does, and most sympathetic methods, you can offer this as a widespread network at a mighty scale and deliver it at mighty pace. So it's enough. I'm never going to say it's plenty, but it's caused the big action and movements that are needed for our transition to EVs. Yeah,
it's enough for the action as fast as we can do it at the moment, essentially.
We have the ability to be to encourage an adoption of EVs as a more of a hockey stick curve rather than linear. So we can actually vertically grow this transition.
Great. I have a question from Richard, and I'm not sure whether Steve, you or Nick, are best positioned to answer this question. And that is that he's thinking of transitioning from a small petrol car, and he does less than 100 miles a week in his car. From an environmental perspective, does it make sense to replace it by an EV?
To a certain extent, I'd suggest it depends what vehicle he's driving, how economical it is, because it might be an old small petrol car that belches out soot and fumes and is at the end of its life, in which case get rid. It's killing the environment. If it's a clean one that's doing good miles a gallon and it's limited mileage, probably worth keeping maybe for a year or two. As the market matures, there'll come a point where it's actually too expensive to run. Because I'm sure one thing Richard will find is that the cost of running these cars is just going to go up and up and up. You know, we've seen petrol go up from a couple of years ago, it was sort of £1.20, £1.30 a gallon, a litre. It's now £1.55. I saw it at £1.80 on the M3 just yesterday. Cost of servicing is expensive. The cost of brake pads, all these costs add up. And if he's only doing 5,000 miles a year, that's not going to be a huge cost, but it will increase over time. So I can't say for sure yes or no, but there will come a point in the next probably 5 years where it will be worth changing. And the big impact, as Nick was saying earlier on, is the benefit to society as everyone moves to cleaner emissions at the point of use is huge. You look in Lewisham and that poor young girl with asthma who was killed by particulate pollution. They took the council to court. It was proved that her death was as a direct result of the particulates in the air. Those go if people move to EVs. So I'm sorry, but those people who say, I'm going to keep my petrol or particularly my diesel until it dies, I'm sorry, you're killing people.
Okay, I'm going to... Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Yes, I'm also on transition, giving people choice. It's an adaptive method, but within concentrated living spaces, mainly cities, people who are using vehicles in a limited context, as the example that you've given, have actually looked at not necessarily the transition to another cleaner propulsion unit, i.e. electric vehicles, and own that asset, but actually relinquish themselves of ownership of vehicle entirely and use a much more blended method of car share schemes, and they are growing in cities very much so. And those cars are new and they're also electric as well. So people are actually finding it much more cost efficient and an easier way of living, doing it in those methods as well. So
I think car sharing too is probably one of the better environmental activities that we could be doing as well as EVs. Okay, I've got a couple of questions. Tim has asked that, or he says he likes the idea that EV batteries could be part of system balancing. However, how do we manage consumer demand and avoid rationing? And also the need to charge with non-renewable generated electricity at times of peak demand. In other words, if EVs really take off, how do we cope with that? Steve?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're transitioning in this country to more sustainable energy. So although we do use gas at peak periods, there's more nuclear, but most importantly, the renewables, whether that's through water, through wind, or through solar, is growing. And we're going to see that grow hugely over coming years. And I think it'll grow faster than demand. So that's number one. The second thing I would say is, going back to the point I made earlier on, EVs are part of the solution. Not everyone is driving their EV at the same time. Most EVs or most vehicles are sitting there parked. If they're parked and they're plugged into a charger, which many of them can be, then that power can be used for those periods of peak demands. And we'll see more and more of that, along with things like grid scale batteries. One of the things that I'm asked sometimes is what happens to the batteries at their end of life after 15 or 20 years? Are they thrown in landfill? Well, the answer is no. They can be recycled, but actually, more importantly, they can be reused in things like grid scale storage, huge battery farms to store some of that renewable energy, and then feed it back into the grid at periods of peak demand rather than firing up a gas power station. So the whole thing really is
renewable themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that because someone else has asked that question. Nick, I've got a question for you here, I think. Someone's asked that they are already an EV owner. This is Rosie. But she's finding poor maintenance levels among public chargers in particular, means low availability in reality. For example, at any one time in her area, there are 2 out of 5 local public chargers are out of use. When is there going to be some pressure on the public charger owners to keep them maintained and available?
Well, a very poignant question, and it is. It's interesting you say this because there is government regulation being applied to public charge point operators for rapid charging networks, which Steve represents with the highly rated Osprey. They have to achieve a standard of 99% uptime availability. I will say that charges, although the standard isn't applied to the lower power charge points, ones that Rosie possibly has been experiencing, Chargy's taking it on board to achieve the 99.6 proudly, 99.6 standard of availability, and that's ahead of any regulations being placed upon us. But part of the forum, which is called Charge UK, where all charge point operators gather and talk with government, these regulations to the lower power are soon to be applied. And also the discussion points of these charge points that are unreliable shouldn't be placed on the online digital maps. They should be taken off them because they're impacting people's consideration for transitioning to electric vehicles because of their fragile operation. So
I've got a question, I think probably for both of you, and please be honest with this. is that when do you think we'll get to a point where you can charge your EV at any charge point and not just one that happens to be suitable for your particular EV?
You already can. The days of non-standard and different standards have pretty much gone. There used to be two main standards in the UK market. In fact, before that, there were two or three others. There's one European standard now, which is the CCS connector. I don't want to get into technical, but basically every car on sale today will charge, we're using the same connector. There are still a small number of networks that only let you charge their vehicles on. The last main holdout was Tesla, and Tesla have opened up their network now. So most of their sites, you can charge any vehicle. We're still in the days that, and going back to the earlier point, there's still a bit of unreliability. And I think if you look at the top 10 charging network brands, any car can charge reliably and their charge points are reliable. There are plenty of smaller brands who maybe came into the market a number of years ago, weren't well funded and didn't have a good business plan, didn't have a good maintenance plan. Those networks will either cease to exist or will be subsumed into the market leaders who will replace and refresh their networks. So that reliability, coupled with the fact that you can use any network and pretty much pay for any network very simply using contactless cards or a simple app, as you can with Chargy and Osprey, means that the whole thing is much easier. And there's still a lot of misinformation based on 5-year-old stuff. But the market has evolved way past that now. And it's I wouldn't say it's not a problem. If you avoid those poor networks, the networks with bad reliability and bad reputation, you won't have a problem.
Is there anywhere in the country you would suggest that we don't go with an EV?
No.
Okay. I've got a rather intriguing question here from Lily. What is the situation regarding insurance premiums for EVs? And what was the learning curve for EVs and floodwater ingress?
Right. Well, very interesting you ask. I was only but talking about insurance for EVs and the whole market. Now, there are, and I'm going to be commercially sensitive here, there are some leading insurance companies that's taken the risk on and actually seen through the risk and understood that actually electric cars aren't that expensive to repair. And they've analysed that against combustion technology as well. And electric vehicles are getting cheaper to repair and easier to repair, and that whole network to repair it is getting more abundant as well. So actually, insurance premiums from a few leading brand suppliers are actually very competitive. So please do inquire through your comparison sites and keep inquiring, because you'll soon find out that those costs are reducing. There was a second part to that question. Can you remind me?
It was about EVs and floodwater ingress. Ah,
yes. Well, there are a number of examples that you can view through the online platform YouTube of electric vehicles driving through the floods. Where's the combustion technology? The person's sort of clambering out of their car mid transition through the ford. So there is sort of proven type that's not necessarily a major problem.
Or at least no more of a problem than a combustion engine.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that, because I have actually done that with my petrol car. Yeah. It's no joke. Yeah. I think we've answered most of the questions that we've got here. I hope I haven't missed any. Does anybody have a final question they'd like to ask? Because we're coming up to nearly 5:30 now.
Jackie, there's the issue of them being silent and not being able to hear them coming. People, pedestrians not hearing them coming.
Yeah, that's a very good question. If I could just ask both of you, Nick and Steve, just to say quickly what your views are, is that because EVs are very, very silent, there is a greater risk to pedestrians and cyclists in particular. Is there any move to make electric cars perhaps noisier?
Yeah, since about 4 years ago, the law changed and they have to generate an artificial noise. So they do now. And that has been developed with the Royal National Institute of the Blind and many other organizations worldwide. You are more likely to be hit by a bicycle. But with modern petrol and diesel engines, they're fairly quiet as they sneak up on you anyhow. The EVs have to emit a noise for pedestrians. So I think that's not an issue nowadays. And certainly the insurance companies, going back to that point, would not say there's any statistical increase. If anything, it's the opposite.
Right. Okay, I've just got one tiny question that I must ask, and that is that when is Formula One going fully electric? Because that would give a high profile example to the rest of us as to what could be achieved.
Formula One has already got hybrids, but there's Formula E, which is the electric version, and in motorcycles, there's an equivalent, an electrical motorcycle race, which is all on Ducatis. I mean, everyone knows Ducatis are renowned for being the most outrageous and the most noisy. They have an electric race series now. I think it's going to be some while before you see one or the other, before you see electric take over, but it's coming. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Nick.
Yes, so another coincidental subject of recent conversation, the racing series Formula E, which Steve has just spoken about, is actually predicted to rise in its popularity, and further investment being given to that race series to actually incur a wealth greater than Formula One over the next 24 months. So and it's quite interesting because the Formula E races can actually be brought to the people, because you can actually run them in cities, and you can run them on the road networks there, because noise and pollution is not apparent, and there's a further crowd engagement that you can actually have with these EV racing cars as well, and they're getting particularly fast. Faster than Formula One in certain cases. So
wow, I'm a big Formula One fan. I said that was going to be my last question, but I'm just going to ask the last question from Tim, who wants to know what should be his next step to getting an EV.
Try one. Go and try a few. Actually, try 3 or 4. Most people will love it, as long as the change in lifestyle suits you. And for most people, they prefer it.
Yeah, I've test driven a Tesla EV, and I must admit it was one of the most exciting things I did.
Yeah, Jackie, can I take a minute just to talk on one thing, because I saw a couple of questions relating to hydrogen, if I may. And I'll just give a couple of stats. People say, well, why not wait for hydrogen? Hydrogen is not the future for cars. First of all, today, most hydrogen comes from fossil fuels. It can come from power, generate electricity to crack water into hydrogen and oxygen, but you need 3 times the amount of power to do 1 mile as you do to use the electricity directly in a battery. Therefore, you would need 3 times as much generating capacity if you were using hydrogen. Plus, you then have to distribute the hydrogen, and bear in mind, it's pretty much one of the most explosive elements in the world. You have to distribute it, you have to deliver it, you have to freeze it. The energy is beyond all recognition. It's just not practical for public transport in cars. It may be suitable in HGVs and ships and trains, but even that, I think, is 10 to 20 years away.
Thanks for that, Steve. Jane, we've just gone over our 8:30. Is there anything you'd like to do to wind up?
Most definitely, yes. To extend enormous thanks to both of our speakers and to you, Jackie, for managing all these questions very well indeed. I think there may be one or two specific questions that we didn't have time for, but I will save the chat here. And if there are, I'll make sure that one of the speakers is actually asked the question and we get an answer to it. I think I've seen one which was a specific question which was going to apply to that person rather more than to the whole group.
Sure.
So thank you so much, both of you, for bringing us up to date, because we did have a talk about EVs before. Steve gave us one before 2.5 years ago, and it's absolutely amazing how much has changed since then. So I really, really hope that some people in this audience will feel more inclined to try an EV. I just personally, I do want to say that I think they are still very silent. I live on a lane with no pedestrian, with no side, what do I mean? Sidewalks, pavements, that's what I'm trying to say. And you know, people walk down the street walking their dog, they walk 3 and 4 abreast, and they don't hear me coming. I don't peep my horn because that seems rude, but they just don't realize I'm there. So I think they are still very quiet, even though they officially do have a sound. Anyway, that was me taking unfair advantage of my position as the thanker for all of you. And thank you to the big audience as well. It's really nice to have you all there. Thank you for the wide variety of questions, and our speakers managed to answer them very, very effectively. So a very successful meeting. Thank you to all.